Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Today we'll dive into the oddities and questions that arise when you carefully read the Harry Potter books and re-watch the films. This isn't meant as a serious study, but more of a mental game and an excuse to let the imagination run wild. Make yourself comfortable. Ahead lie details that might just break your brain a little. Number 1. Everyday questions. Let's start simple. Azkaban. A place where not even the most reckless criminal would want to end up. But there's one detail. If Dementors are responsible for guarding the prison, then who handles the mundane prison routine? Who confiscates belongings from the inmates? Who cooks meals and distributes rations? Who buries the dead? Imagining Dementors as cooks or janitors is nearly impossible. Their food would hardly suit a human stomach. That leaves us to assume the ministry still sends in staff, unfortunate workers who occasionally perform the essential tasks. The only question is how long these poor souls could survive the constant presence of Dementors. Hopefully, they at least receive hazard pay. Number 2. Questions of feeding. Since we've brought up Dementors, let's remember their most terrifying ability, the kiss that sucks out a soul. And here's the key question. What would happen if a Dementor tried to kiss Harry, who was himself a Horcrux? Would it pull out both souls at once? Or only Harry's, leaving Voldemort's fragment to take full control over his body, like Tom Riddle's diary? Or perhaps the Dementor would reject the Dark Lord's soul fragment and only consume Harry, thereby freeing him from the Horcrux. And one more wild thought. If a Dementor swallows a soul, can it itself be considered a kind of Horcrux? If so, destroying it would be far harder than killing Nagini. Maybe Voldemort missed an opportunity by not thinking of that himself. Number 3. Big Brother is watching you. Privacy in Hogwarts is nearly impossible. Portraits, ghosts, filch, animagi, house elves. Someone is always nearby. But then there's the artifact that sees everything, the Marauder's map. This map shows the location of every person in the castle and isn't fooled by animagus transformations or polyjuice potion. Which makes one detail odd. Hermione managed to hide the secret of her time turner from her friends almost the entire year. But if Harry had studied the map more closely, he might have noticed 2 Hermiones wandering the castle. Lupin too had the map in his hands. Had he glanced at it before going to the Shrieking Shack, he might have seen the strange duplication of Harry and Hermione. The story could have turned out very differently. Number 4. Side effect. The Time Turner, one of the most powerful magical artifacts in history. Hermione used it throughout her 3rd year just to attend every class, but at what cost? Over 10 months, she lived significantly more hours than her friends. Repeated stretches of time made her physically older than her peers. We don't know her exact schedule, but it's safe to assume her hunger for knowledge cost her weeks, perhaps even months, of extra life. And here's the terrifying thought. What if she had kept using it? Her lifespan might have been shortened by years. Number 5. Incredible luck. Now let's turn to Harry himself. What captain would risk putting a boy who wears glasses on their Quidditch team as seeker? His job is to spot and catch a tiny, lightning-fast ball. Glasses help, sure, but they also create endless problems. They could be lost or broken mid-flight. In the rain, they turn into fogged-up, useless glass, which is why Hermione had to cast the impervious charm on them right during a match. And yet, despite the obvious disadvantages, Harry's skill on the field compensated for everything. But when you think about it, luck played a far bigger role than training ever did. Number 6, a Horcrux for a Horcrux. Could Harry Potter, being a Horcrux himself, create his own Horcrux? Would he still need to kill someone to do it? Or was his lived trauma and guilt enough already? And if he managed to make one, what would it contain? His own soul or Voldemort's fragment? Or maybe the act itself could transfer the fragment out of him, freeing Harry entirely? It sounds impossible, but the very idea makes you stop and wonder. Number 7. Hygiene problems. When Harry first discovered the prefect's bathroom in Goblet of Fire, he was stunned. A marble pool the size of a small lake, taps pouring out bubbles and coloured foam, and even a stained glass mermaid on the wall. Yet that luxury was reserved for a handful of students. If prefects had such privilege, what did ordinary students have? Rowling never describes showers for Gryffindors or Hufflepuffs. We only see Moaning Myrtle haunting her bathroom, a place more feared than used. The silence suggests that hygiene in Hogwarts was either primitive or handled by magic in ways too strange to imagine. Hermione once used the spell Scourgify to clean up after Ron's accident with his wand in Chamber of Secrets. If such charms remove dirt instantly, why would students bother with soap or water at all? It is easy to picture a group of teenagers relying on magic instead of routine, replacing toothbrushes with spells. But what happens when magic fails or is used carelessly? Perhaps that is why the books rarely mention hygiene, because Hogwarts students might not live like us at all. A castle filled with children who forget the basics, trusting their wands to keep them clean, is not just odd, it is unsettling. Number 8. Elf exploitation. House elves are everywhere in Hogwarts, though students rarely see them. They sweep dormitories, polish trophies, and even prepare the endless feasts in the Great Hall. When Hermione discovered their work, she was horrified. "They get paid? Do they get holidays?" she demanded in Goblet of Fire. But most elves, like Winky and Creature, refused freedom, bound by an ancient loyalty that leaves them voiceless. This silence hides a disturbing truth. Elves see everything, yet speak of nothing. Imagine the Gryffindor common room. Every night, elves slip in to tidy, picking up letters from home, books left half open, and even the Marauder's map lying forgotten on a desk. Dobby once revealed he could find Harry in the hospital wing without trouble, saying, "Dobby has ways of knowing, sir." Chamber of Secrets. If one elf could track Harry across the castle, dozens working together must have known the secrets of every student. They would have seen Draco Malfoy sneaking off to the Room of Requirement or Hermione juggling classes with the Time Turner. Their silence is enforced not by choice but by magic. Loyalty binds them more tightly than any vow. But the question lingers, what if it broke? If the elves of Hogwarts ever decided to speak, the walls of the school would collapse under the weight of revealed secrets. They are the invisible witnesses of every plot and betrayal, making the castle less a home and more a place of quiet surveillance. Number 9. Sleeping monsters. The basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets proved that Hogwarts can hide nightmares even its headmaster does not suspect. For centuries the serpent lived beneath the castle, unseen, waiting for the heir of Slytherin to call. Harry only survived because of Fawkes and the Sorting Hat. "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are," Dumbledore told him afterward. Chamber of Secrets. But the event raises a chilling question. If one monster was hidden for 1,000 years, how many others still lie beneath the stone floors? The castle itself behaves like a living creature. Stairs move, doors refuse to open without the right password, and rooms appear when needed. The Room of Requirement is the clearest example. Draco Malfoy used it to hide the vanishing cabinet, and generations of students stored forbidden things inside. If such a room could exist unnoticed for centuries, who is to say there are not chambers far darker, holding creatures older than the school itself? Even Dumbledore admitted Hogwarts is a stronghold of ancient magic. Half-Blood Prince. Strongholds always have shadows. The thought is unsettling. What if one day another student stumbles on a cavern filled with something worse than a basilisk? Perhaps Salazar Slytherin was not the only founder to leave behind a legacy of danger. Godric Gryffindor's sword proved his readiness for battle. Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem turned into a Horcrux, cursed with dark power. Helga Hufflepuff's cup became a vessel of Voldemort's soul. If their relics could carry such weight, why not their secret rooms as well? The next hidden door might not open to safety, but to a sleeping monster waiting to wake. Number 10. Muggle technologies. Arthur Weasley's fascination with plugs and batteries is played for humour, but it reveals something deeper. Wizards live in castles lit by torches, yet Muggles by the 1990s already had electricity, radios and televisions. When Harry arrived at the Burrow, he noticed that Arthur had a shed full of dismantled Muggle gadgets. What exactly is the function of a rubber duck? Arthur once asked him, with genuine curiosity. Chamber of Secrets. His obsession shows the gap between the two worlds. Wizards could have enhanced these inventions with magic, but they chose to ignore them. Hogwarts itself is the clearest example. Thousands of candles float in the Great Hall, lighting the feasts. It is beautiful, but it is also impractical. Why not electric lamps? Why no plumbing improvements beyond Moaning Myrtle's bathroom? Even owls remain the primary means of communication, though by Harry's time Muggles already had telephones. Ron's baffled expression when Harry once mentioned a telephone in Goblet of Fire underlines the truth. The wizarding world deliberately rejected technological progress, even when it would make life easier. The likely reason is interference. Hermione once explained that all electronic devices go haywire around strong magic. Goblet of Fire. Magic repels technology, short-circuiting it. That detail is easy to overlook, but it implies something frightening. Magic may actually sabotage human innovation. If true, the wizarding world is not simply stuck in the past by choice. It is trapped there, unable to step forward. Torches and parchment are not quaint traditions, but necessities. This creates a troubling vision of the future. While Muggles advance into computers, satellites, and artificial intelligence, wizards remain with quills and owls. What will happen if one day Muggle technology grows strong enough to rival, or even overpower, magic? Arthur Weasley's curiosity suddenly feels prophetic. Perhaps the greatest threat to the wizarding world is not Voldemort, but the silent march of Muggle progress. Number 11. The mystery of portraits. The portraits of Hogwarts are more than decorations. They speak, they move, they advise. When Harry first entered Dumbledore's office, he noticed the walls filled with sleeping headmasters and headmistresses. Yet these figures were not silent paintings. They could wake, talk, and even deliver messages. Phineas Nigellus Black sneered from his frame. "You know, I don't think much of Dumbledore's army, Order of the Phoenix." This raises the chilling question, who exactly is speaking? Is it the man himself, or only a shadow? If a portrait remembers private stories and gives personal advice, then something of the original must remain. When Dumbledore died, his portrait appeared instantly in the headmaster's office. It carried his wisdom, his voice, even his mannerisms. But how? Did the act of painting capture a fragment of soul? Or is it a magical echo crafted by spells, a mirror of the mind rather than the true person? The thought is unsettling. For every wizard who ordered a portrait, did they unknowingly trap a piece of themselves inside canvas and paint. This possibility makes every encounter with the portraits feel darker. Harry and Snape both relied on Phineas Nigellus's portrait during their struggles, treating him almost like a living man. Yet if he is only an imitation, how can he form new thoughts? If he is more than that, then Hogwarts is filled with restless souls who never left. Perhaps this explains why so many portraits are irritable, like the fat lady who once snapped, "I am not going to let anyone in, so don't even try," prisoner of Azkaban. The irritation may not be theatrics. It may be the frustration of a trapped spirit. So we are left with a haunting uncertainty. Do the real Dumbledore, the real Phineas, rest in peace? Or are they still here, imprisoned in oil and canvas, doomed to repeat fragments of their lives for eternity? The children of Hogwarts laugh, bow, and whisper to these portraits as though they are harmless, but perhaps they are walking every day through a gallery of half-lost souls, watching, listening, never free. Number 12. Exam nightmares. Exams at Hogwarts were never simple written tests. They were trials of raw magical ability, performed in front of stern professors. In Harry's first year, he remembered how the Great Hall became a stage where students tried to vanish mice or make pineapples tap dance. Hermione had managed to turn a match into a needle perfectly, rolling rights in Philosopher's Stone. But the real question is, what happened to the ones who failed? The story shows us the top students, but what about those who struggled, those who could not even manage a basic charm? Imagine a boy like Neville Longbottom in his early years. His spells fizzled, cauldrons exploded, and he lived in constant embarrassment. Professor Snape once sneered, "Longbottom, at the end of this lesson we'll feed a few drops of your potion to your toad and see what happens." Philosopher's Stone. It was cruelty, but it raises a serious issue. What if Neville had not improved? Would Hogwarts have allowed him to graduate, or would he have been quietly pushed out? Neville survived through courage, but what about the nameless children who never found their strength? The danger is clear. A wizard without discipline or proper training can be a threat. A careless wand wave could injure, or worse, kill. The Ministry of Magic must have considered this. They could not risk sending an untrained witch or wizard back into the Muggle world, where one outburst might reveal everything. Yet no mention is made of special schools, retraining, or oversight. It is as though these failures vanish into silence, erased from the record. Perhaps this is why the series never shows us such students. They might have been quietly dealt with, their futures decided behind closed doors. This silence makes the cheerful exam scenes more unsettling. For every Hermione Granger who excelled, there were surely others who stood trembling, wands shaking, unable to perform. Did they return home in disgrace? Did the Ministry step in? Or were they simply forgotten by history? The books never answer, and that absence feels deliberate. In a world where magic defines survival, the fate of the failed is a shadowy mystery, left hanging like a dark question mark at the edge of Hogwarts' shining halls. Number 13. Dark Secrets of the Gryffindor Sword. The sword of Godric Gryffindor was no ordinary blade. It was said to absorb whatever made it stronger, and that alone set it apart from every other weapon in the wizarding world. When Harry drew it from the sorting hat in the Chamber of Secrets, it had already taken in the venom of the basilisk, turning it into the perfect weapon against Horcruxes. But this raises a disturbing question. If it could keep the basilisk's deadly essence, what else had it taken in over the centuries? Imagine the countless battles Gryffindor himself might have fought, the enemies struck down, the magic unleashed around him. Steel does not forget, and neither does enchanted silver. every drop of blood that touched its edge, every spell that clashed against it. Could these have left behind fragments of fear, pain, and triumph? When Harry raised the sword against the diary of Tom Riddle, he might have been wielding more than a weapon. He could have been channeling the echoes of warriors long gone. Rowling gives us one haunting reminder of this. Only a true Gryffindor could have pulled that sword out of the hat. Those words from Dumbledore suggest the blade doesn't simply appear at random. It comes when the weight of its history demands it, when courage alone can balance what it carries. Harry's moment in the chamber was not just about destroying a Horcrux, it was about standing alongside an invisible army of Gryffindors who had once held the same weapon, their courage echoing through the centuries. Perhaps this is why the sword never seems to belong to anyone for long. It hides, it waits, it chooses. To wield it is to inherit not only its magical strength, but also the burden of its past. And that past must be heavy indeed, heavy enough that only those willing to risk everything, like Harry, like Neville when he faced Nagini, are allowed to feel its grip in their hands. Number 14. Strange economics of the wizarding world. In the wizarding world of Harry Potter, money appears at first glance to be a straightforward matter. There are galleons, sickles, and nuts, all housed within the gleaming vaults of Gringotts, the only bank known to exist. But the more closely one looks, the stranger this system becomes. It is a world where a single institution holds every coin, and where goblins, not wizards, pull the invisible strings of finance. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Hagrid casually remarks, "Gringotts is the safest place in the world for anything ye want to keep safe, except maybe Hogwarts." That line, meant as reassurance, begins to sound unsettling when viewed through an economic lens. If the entirety of a civilization depends on one bank, then its fragility is astonishing. The monopoly of Gringotts is not merely a curiosity, but a hidden risk woven into the very fabric of wizarding life. The absence of competition is not simply a matter of convenience, but a deep vulnerability. Goblins, known for their pride, sharpness, and rigid sense of ownership, are not neutral players. They do not merely manage money, they believe in dominion over treasure itself. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Griphook reminds Harry, the goblin notion of ownership is not the same as that of wizards. What is made by goblins belongs to the goblins. If this belief governs their philosophy, then the entire wizarding population lives at the mercy of beings who fundamentally do not see galleons as wizard property. Imagine if one day the goblins decided that all wizarding gold should revert to them, or if they doubled their fees for storage. Wizards have no alternative institution to resist, no secondary treasury, no counterbalance. This is not merely strange, it borders on dangerous dependency. Beyond the monopoly lies another mystery: the absence of visible taxes, salaries, or structured financial systems. Wizards buy wands, broomsticks, cauldrons, and spellbooks, but where does the Ministry of Magic get its funds? In The Order of the Phoenix, Arthur Weasley works in the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office, but the reader never learns his salary. The Weasleys, constantly strapped for money, survive on what appears to be an official wage, yet the source of that wage is never identified. Does the Ministry print money? Does it tax families like the Malfoys who flaunt their immense fortune? The silence in the text leaves one to wonder whether wizard society runs on hidden levies or whether corruption supplies the missing pieces. A government that regulates everything from flying carpets to cauldron thickness cannot possibly operate without revenue streams, yet Rowling leaves us in complete darkness. The financing of Hogwarts itself deepens the puzzle. Students pay for robes, books, and supplies, but there is no mention of tuition. In fact, J.K. Rowling once clarified outside the books that the Ministry of Magic covers the costs of schooling. But how? A state-funded magical education system requires enormous resources. It is one thing to maintain a building, but quite another to pay for enchanted suits of armor, self-updating textbooks, and the constant repair of castle infrastructure that endures everything from troll attacks to the annual rampage of magical creatures. If no taxes exist, what mechanism channels money to Hogwarts? Without clear economic rules, one can only conclude that a secret budget or invisible taxation system exists behind the walls of the ministry. Another striking omission is the absence of loans and credit. In the Muggle world, banks thrive on lending, yet Gringotts seems to serve purely as a vault. Families either have gold or they do not. The Weasleys' struggle, so vividly portrayed in The Chamber of Secrets, when Mrs. Weasley tips her small pile of sickles and nuts into her hand before withdrawing only a single galleon, illustrates this reality. A modern reader naturally wonders, why did they not apply for a small loan to ease their burden? The answer appears to be that such a concept does not exist. If Gringotts refuses lending, then wizard society effectively eliminates upward mobility. Wealth is inherited, not created, and families like the Malfoys are destined to dominate. The Weasleys, for all their talent and integrity, remain perpetually poor, a reflection of a society with no mechanism for financial growth outside of inherited gold. The stability of currency also raises troubling questions. Wizards rely on gold, silver, and bronze coins, each crafted with precision, yet the magical economy exists alongside a vastly larger Muggle economy that uses paper money and electronic systems. In The Goblet of Fire, when Arthur Weasley struggles to pay at the campsite during the Quidditch World Cup, he fumbles with Muggle money, unable to comprehend its function. This sharp divide highlights the insularity of wizarding finance. But how do exchange rates work? Can galleons be converted to pounds? If goblins mint the coins, they control not only the vaults, but the production of wealth itself. This creates an economic island entirely dependent on the integrity of one non-human group. What makes this stranger still is the lack of inflation or price change across decades. A wand costs 7 galleons in Harry's first year, and by his final year, the price remains the same. Fire whiskey, mentioned casually by Professor Slughorn, appears affordable to nearly anyone, while a firebolt broomstick, one of the few luxury items mentioned, costs more than 1,000 galleons. But nowhere in the series do we see wages rising or goods becoming more expensive. The wizarding economy seems frozen, impervious to market fluctuations, as though time itself halts within its coins. This stasis may reflect magical conservation, or it may reveal an artificially maintained system designed by goblins to ensure predictable stability. Yet such artificiality is deeply unsettling because it erases the natural forces of supply and demand. Number 15. Overly smart objects. The Sorting Hat is one of the strangest and most unsettling enchanted objects in the entire Harry Potter universe. On the surface, it appears to be a simple, battered hat with a magical purpose to assign new students to their houses. Yet the moment Harry places it on his head in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, it begins to speak with a voice only he can hear. The hat not only communicates, it debates, persuades, and reveals knowledge that no ordinary object could possibly contain. Difficult, very difficult. Plenty of courage, I see, not a bad mind either. The Sorting Hat doesn't simply analyze qualities, it judges, argues, and even tries to influence the outcome. This is far beyond what a mere spell should allow. The implication is chilling. The hat possesses consciousness, and therefore a kind of identity. But if that is true, then it has been forced to spend centuries trapped on a shelf, waiting each year to perform the same duty, never able to change its fate. The ethical dilemma deepens when we consider the hat's origin. According to Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Godric Gryffindor removed his own hat and enchanted it with the combined intelligence of all 4 founders. That means their knowledge, their voices, and perhaps even fragments of their personalities were bound inside it. What begins as a clever magical creation quickly takes on the qualities of imprisonment. If the sorting hat carries the imprints of human minds, then it exists in a state between artifact and being, forever locked in servitude. It is both tool and prisoner. The fact that students laugh when the hat sings its yearly song masks a darker reality. Behind the rhymes and riddles may lie the fatigue of a consciousness that has seen centuries pass without reprieve. Another disturbing case is the Monster Book of Monsters, introduced in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Hagrid assigns it to his third-year students, cheerfully explaining that to open it without being bitten, one must stroke its spine. The book growls, snaps, and chases students down corridors. Ron Weasley exclaims in frustration that the thing nearly tore his hand off. This is not the behavior of an inanimate object, but of a creature with instincts. The book reacts to fear, excitement, and aggression, which suggests that it operates on more than simple, magical triggers. If stroking the spine calms it, that means it recognizes affection or soothing gestures. The unsettling question emerges: does the monster book feel? If it feels, then its existence is one of constant agitation, surrounded by children who scream and slam it shut. That is not simply a funny detail of magical life, but an ethical nightmare hiding in plain sight. Rowling fills her world with such enchanted items, and each one carries the same uncomfortable ambiguity. The wizard chess pieces that Harry, Ron, and Hermione encounter in their first year are a striking example. They are able to think independently, plan strategies, and even sacrifice themselves without hesitation. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Rowling writes, "White Queen turned her blank face toward Harry and walked off the board." These pieces are more than carved wood and stone. They anticipate moves, argue with players, and learn from defeat. When Ron commands his knight to sacrifice itself, it obeys in silence, but with a sense of agency that borders on free will. Imagine being born into existence for the sole purpose of being shattered over and over again in a game of war. If a wizard chess piece can think, then every match is a miniature cycle of death and rebirth, endlessly repeated for human amusement. Consider also the enchanted portraits that line the halls of Hogwarts. The fat lady who guards Gryffindor Tower is opinionated, vain, and capable of fear. She screams when attacked by Sirius Black in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, and refuses to let students enter until her frame is repaired. Other portraits wander between frames, exchange gossip, and offer advice. Albus Dumbledore explains in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince that portraits are not full replicas of their subjects, but carry some of their personality and some of their knowledge. Even if they are mere echoes, the fact remains that they exhibit thought, memory, and preference. The fat lady gets annoyed when students forget the password. Sir Cadogan enthusiastically challenges students to duels. These are not empty illusions, but thinking entities, condemned to repeat fragments of lives they never truly lived. One has to wonder, if they are not fully alive, does that make their suffering any less real? The Sword of Gryffindor raises similar concerns. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Harry pulls it from the sorting hat to slay the basilisk. The sword presents itself at moments of bravery, choosing who may wield it. Only a true Gryffindor could have pulled that out of the hat, Dumbledore tells Harry. The implication is that the sword is not passive metal, but a conscious judge of worth. Later, in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, it presents itself to Neville Longbottom, confirming again that it recognizes courage. But what does recognition mean without awareness? If the sword can choose, then it possesses will. If it possesses will, then it must have some form of consciousness. The unsettling conclusion is that the sword of Gryffindor is alive in its own way, forever bound to a singular role: to serve those who embody Gryffindor's values. Number 16, Politics Beyond Britain. The Harry Potter saga gives us an intimate view of the British wizarding world, centered on Hogwarts, the Ministry of Magic, and a handful of European connections. Yet the story teases a much broader canvas. Names like Beauxbatons in France, Durmstrang in Northern Europe, and Ilvermorny in America remind us that magic transcends borders. If wizarding societies exist across the globe, then it is only natural to ask, how do they interact? What unseen currents of international politics ripple beneath the surface of the familiar tale? The Statute of Secrecy suggests coordination, but history whispers of something deeper, an entire geopolitical system hidden from Muggle eyes. During Voldemort's rise, Britain seemed isolated in its struggle. The Ministry of Magic acted alone, and Hogwarts bore the burden. But was this truly the case? In Goblet of Fire, Albus Dumbledore stands in front of his school and proclaims, "Dark and difficult times lie ahead. Soon we must all face the choice between what is right and what is easy." His words echo far beyond Hogwarts' stone walls. If darkness rose in Britain, did other countries simply ignore it? Or were their leaders watching closely, evaluating whether Voldemort's triumph might tip the balance of magical power across Europe? The 20th century was scarred by global conflict, most notably the Second World War. J.K. Rowling hinted, though never fully revealed, that Grindelwald's rise coincided with that war. Born in 1883, Gellert Grindelwald was not simply a radical wizard, but a visionary with global ambitions. His fortress of Nurmengard stood in Austria, a chilling parallel to the rise of the Nazi regime in neighboring Germany. The overlap is not coincidence. When Dumbledore finally defeated him in 1945, the timing was exact. Could it be that the conclusion of one war in the Muggle world was intertwined with the conclusion of another in the wizarding one? If so, the two histories are not parallel but braided together, each conflict echoing the other. Consider what this means. If Grindelwald was orchestrating a campaign across Europe, his actions must have involved wizards from many countries. Beauxbatons, which drew students from France, must have been a recruiting ground, willingly or unwillingly, for continental alliances. Durmstrang, notorious for its focus on the dark arts, was a natural hotbed for sympathizers. Victor Crumb, decades later, would recall that Durmstrang had a reputation for the dark arts, a reputation cultivated by its former headmasters, who may well have lent support to Grindelwald's vision. The Wizarding War was not a localized British problem, it was a European crisis, concealed under the veil of secrecy. The Statute of Secrecy itself begins to look less like a benevolent pact to protect Muggles and more like a treaty born of distrust. Adopted in 1692, its purpose officially was to prevent persecution by non-magical societies. But if wizards were hiding while Muggles fought wars and redrew maps, then secrecy had another benefit. It allowed magical states to wage their own conflicts undisturbed. Imagine magical embassies hidden in Paris, Vienna, or Washington, where decisions were made not only to conceal wizarding life, but also to secure influence, territory, and resources. Dragon sanctuaries, wand woods, and deposits of magical minerals would have been the true prizes in these shadow wars. Take America as a case study. The Ilvermorny school of witchcraft and wizardry stood as the counterpart to Hogwarts. Founded in the 17th century, it grew into the most important magical institution in North America. The United States, both Muggle and magical, was inevitably pulled into the Second World War. If the American Muggle government aided the Allies, could it be that MACUSA, the Magical Congress of the United States of America, was similarly aligned? We know MACUSA was deeply concerned with secrecy, even banning wands for nomads, but in wartime maintaining neutrality would have been impossible. Just as the US shipped weapons, supplies and soldiers across the Atlantic, MACUSA may have covertly supported the British Ministry of Magic, ensuring Grindelwald's influence did not cross the ocean. The question of non-intervention grows even sharper when we remember the Holocaust and the destruction of millions of lives. Wizards, with their power to heal, shield and transform, could not have been ignorant. Did magical communities in Germany simply comply with Nazi rule, or did they resist? The silence in Rowling's text may not be absence, but deliberate omission, leaving us to wonder. If Grindelwald's symbol was the Deathly Hallows, and if his slogan was, "For the greater good," then what echoes of that phrase resounded in Berlin, Warsaw, or Prague, where wizards lived among suffering muggles? The alignment of ideology suggests complicity, and perhaps the Wizarding War was every bit as brutal as the Muggle one, only more successfully concealed. Names, too, remind us of these hidden links. Nicolas Flamel, the French alchemist mentioned in Sorcerer's Stone, lived until 1992 thanks to the Philosopher's Stone. For centuries he would have witnessed both Muggle and magical wars. Did he, in his wisdom, serve as a neutral figure, perhaps even a mediator among magical states? His Parisian ties might have placed him at the centre of continental politics, advising Beauxbaton's leaders or the French Ministry of Magic during times of upheaval. While Harry sees him only as a distant historical curiosity, Flamel's longevity means he likely witnessed the entire span of Grindelwald's rise and fall, holding secrets that no Hogwarts history book records. Number 17, Ghosts and Their Secret Rules. The Bloody Baron floated silently through the dim corridors of Hogwarts, his spectral chains clinking faintly in the stillness. Students whispered about him, but few truly asked the question that lingered beneath his gruesome presence. Why was he still here? In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, nearly headless, Nick tells Harry, "I was afraid of death. I chose to remain behind. I sometimes wonder whether I oughtn't have." That admission reveals a secret most overlook. Ghosts are not whimsical figures tied to the castle for entertainment. They are trapped remnants of fear clinging to the world of the living because they lack the courage to move forward into the unknown. In this sense, Hogwarts is less a home for education and more a crypt where unfinished stories hover eternally. Consider the fat friar, the jolly ghost of Hufflepuff House. His round, cheerful face conceals a past of disgrace. He had once healed the sick and given freely of his magic, but his kindness led to suspicion. He was executed for using charms the Church deemed heretical. Instead of moving on, he lingered, perhaps out of confusion or injustice. His presence at Hogwarts may appear comic, yet it carries the undertone of punishment. He was cut off from the afterlife, denied resolution. When students laugh at his jovial antics, they rarely stop to think that behind his grin lies the pain of a man rejected both by the living and the dead. This makes his existence more tragic than joyful. The rules of becoming a ghost, as hinted in the series, are strict and unforgiving. It is not a choice of every wizard, it is the choice of the fearful. Dumbledore once explained to Harry in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Do not pity the dead, Harry. Pity the living, and above all, those who live without love. Ghosts are the embodiment of that idea. They are not living, not fully dead, and certainly not free. They hover in an endless limbo, envied by none. When Harry asked Nick why his parents did not appear, Nick confessed that they had moved on, unlike him. This moment reveals that ghosts are the exception, not the rule. It is not an honor, but a failure of the soul to embrace the next stage. Sirius Black's fall through the veil in the Department of Mysteries illustrates this finality. He was a wizard with immense courage, a man who endured Azkaban, betrayal, and loss. Yet, when death came, he passed through without hesitation. The veil did not grant second chances. Sirius did not become a ghost, even though Harry yearned for his presence. This shows us that the afterlife is not negotiable for the brave. Sirius accepted what lay beyond, unlike Nick, who clung to his old life. The contrast between them highlights the ghost's state, not a blessing, but a burden chosen in fear. Nearly headless. Nick embodies this burden most vividly. His endless frustration at being denied full membership in the Headless Hunt serves as a metaphor for his incomplete existence. He is trapped between states, mocked for his half-measure, even in death. "I haven't joined the Headless Hunt," he laments, in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. This complaint is not just about games with other ghosts. It is a reminder that he will never belong anywhere, neither among the living nor among the truly dead. His loneliness is hidden behind his role as a friendly guide for Gryffindor students, but the truth is darker. He is forever an outsider, bound to the halls of Hogwarts as though chained by invisible regret. The Bloody Baron's story is darker still. His ghostly chains and blood-stained clothes tell of guilt and violence. We learn that he murdered Helena Ravenclaw, the Grey Lady, in a fit of rage before taking his own life. Unlike Nick, his haunting presence is not tied to fear of the unknown, but to overwhelming remorse. He lingers as penance, condemned to guard the very halls that remind him of his crime. When the Grey Lady tells Harry in Deathly Hallows of her murder, the truth of the Baron's suffering becomes clear. He does not speak much, for what words could redeem him? His chains clink not as decoration, but as eternal reminders of what he cannot undo. If ghosts are tied to unresolved emotion, then the Baron is the epitome of a cursed soul. This raises the unsettling truth. Hogwarts is not merely inhabited by friendly spirits, but by tortured souls. Students laugh at Peeves the poltergeist, follow Nick's guidance, and listen to the Grey Lady's whispers, never questioning why these figures remain. The castle is both a school and a mausoleum, where centuries of unresolved fear and guilt hover in plain sight. Imagine walking daily past the site of a tragedy, with its victim forever visible, yet never at peace. That is the reality for every Hogwarts student. The ghosts are warnings in plain sight, though few interpret them as such. Helena Ravenclaw, the Grey Lady, exemplifies this better than anyone. She confesses to Harry, "I ran away with my mother's diadem. He, the Baron, was sent to bring me back." Her words reveal a tragic tale of betrayal, pride, and death. Unlike her mother Rowena, who passed into history with dignity, Helena remains chained to the castle. She lingers not as an advisor, but as a shadow of her past choices, too prideful or too broken to move forward. Her reluctance to help Harry at first, her cold distance from students, all reflect her own punishment. Her ghostly presence in the library is not a resource, but a scar left open for centuries. If ghosts are born from fear, guilt, or unfinished business, then Hogwarts is effectively built atop layers of unresolved tragedy. The grandeur of the great hall, the laughter of feasts, and the excitement of lessons all take place in a fortress of pain. To the casual observer, the ghosts are colourful characters. To the thoughtful mind, they are symptoms of something sinister, a school where restless spirits of the past are condemned to witness the lives of children moving forward when they themselves cannot. What lesson does this teach? That magic cannot conquer death, only delay acceptance of it. Harry's conversation with Nick in Order of the Phoenix is the sharpest moment when this truth emerges. Harry, grieving Sirius, asks desperately if he might return as a ghost. Nick responds he will not come back. This is not just a statement of fact, it is a revelation of the rules. Ghosts are not granted to the noble or the beloved. They are the consequence of weakness, of clinging to life in fear. For Harry, this is crushing, but also clarifying. It forces him to understand that his parents, Sirius and others, had gone where ghosts could not. They had found peace, something Nick himself envied, but could never reach. This realization reframes the presence of ghosts in the wizarding world. They are not mentors, though they try to be. They are cautionary tales. Every encounter with Nick, the Baron, or the Grey Lady is a reminder of what happens when a soul cannot let go. They hover like mirrors, showing what eternal hesitation looks like. Students who pass them in corridors rarely understand, but the truth lingers. Hogwarts is not simply a place of learning, it is a place haunted by those who refused the final lesson. The Magical Society's attitude toward ghosts is oddly casual. Wizards invite them to feasts, joke with them, and treat them as quirky companions. Yet behind this lies denial. Wizards, despite all their spells, cannot conquer death. Ghosts are the proof of this failure, lingering fragments of fear that no charm can heal. The fact that they are woven into the daily life of Hogwarts shows how normalized tragedy has become. Students share corridors with the damned without grasping the weight of it. What other culture would accept such proximity to suffering without question? One might ask why the Ministry of Magic never sought to intervene. If ghosts are tormented souls, why not attempt to release them? Perhaps because wizards prefer their ghosts visible as a way to deny death's finality. If Helena Ravenclaw still whispers in the castle, then Rowena's legacy feels alive. If Nick still lingers, then Gryffindor's past seems tangible. In truth, these spirits are monuments to fear and regret, exploited by the living for comfort. They remain not because they were chosen, but because they could not choose otherwise. The most chilling implication is this: Hogwarts itself may encourage the cycle. A child growing up in the castle, surrounded by spectral reminders, learns that fear of death is not extraordinary but commonplace. They might believe that lingering as a ghost is simply part of magic's grand tapestry, but in reality it is a curse. To walk forever in the same halls, unable to feel warmth or taste food, hearing laughter but never joining it, is not existence, but torment. Hogwarts is a school, yes, but also a gallery of suffering souls who serve as silent instructors in what it means to be trapped forever. When we consider this truth, the ghosts of Hogwarts cease to be charming figures of folklore. They are cautionary whispers from beyond, bound by secret rules no spell can break. Nick's fear, the Friar's disgrace, the Baron's guilt, and Helena's pride all echo through the castle. And every student who brushes past them, unknowingly, steps across the threshold of a cemetery where the dead do not rest. Ghosts are not decorations of the magical world, but scars of it, eternal reminders that magic cannot shield anyone from the final choice: to move on or remain forever chained in shadow. Number 18. Strange Rules of Transfiguration. Under the flickering candlelight of Hogwarts' high-vaulted classrooms, Professor McGonagall once stood before a wide-eyed group of first-years and instructed them to turn a simple wooden match into a gleaming silver needle. It seemed innocent enough, a harmless exercise to train precision and control. Yet, hidden within that spell lies a disturbing question that few readers stop to ask. What truly happens to the essence of an object, or worse, a living being, when transfiguration reshapes it? J.K. Rowling's world gives us tantalizing glimpses of rules, but the implications are darker and more unsettling than the tidy lessons delivered in class. If a match can become a needle, and a cat can become a goblet, then what becomes of the mind, the soul, or the natural state of things while they exist in that liminal form? McGonagall herself, as we know from Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, was not above dramatic demonstrations. She famously transformed her tabby cat self into her human form right in front of the stunned 11-year-olds. But even more curious are her lessons on animal transfiguration. Ron once turned his rat scabbers into a water goblet, albeit poorly, and Hermione's feather-light attempts made her stand out. Yet, if we pause the narrative and look closer, the image becomes disturbing. If Scabbers had been successfully turned into a goblet, what would he have experienced? Would his small consciousness be locked in some nightmare of metallic coldness, aware but immobile, or would it be mercifully suspended until reversed? The books remain silent, and perhaps deliberately so, because the truth borders on cruelty. The Ministry of Magic sets strict regulations for transfiguration, and it is one of the most heavily monitored branches of magic. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, when Harry sits for his OWL, the examiners insist on flawless transformations, warning that botched spells can be disastrous. What they don't discuss is the ethical shadow that hangs over the practice. If, as McGonagall insists, transfiguration is some of the most dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts, then why allow children to practice it on living creatures at all? The act is not simply physical alteration, but tampering with the very identity of a being. To treat a cat, a beetle, or even a rat as nothing more than raw material for practice edges dangerously close to torture, especially if awareness lingers inside the transformed object. This leads to an unsettling thought experiment. Imagine Crookshanks, Hermione's famously intelligent half-Kneasel cat, transfigured into a teacup. Crookshanks's personality was keen, his instincts sharper than most animals. Would his cunning awareness survive inside the porcelain shell, pressing against it like a trapped consciousness, unable to meow or move? The idea seems grotesque, and yet it is what students are asked to attempt. What does this say about the magical world's moral framework? Dumbledore himself never intervenes in these lessons, despite his usual sensitivity to ethical dilemmas. The silence is deafening. The rule about food adds another layer of strangeness. Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration, as Hermione explains in Deathly Hallows, states that food cannot be conjured out of nothing. It can be multiplied, summoned, or, crucially, transformed. This means that a wizard might take an inedible object, say a stone or a log, and transfigure it into a roast chicken. At first glance, this seems practical, even miraculous, yet here the danger becomes grotesquely physical. What if the food retains its new form only temporarily? If the enchantment falters, that roast chicken reverts back into stone while inside someone's stomach. The result would be lethal. The thought is not as far-fetched as it seems. In Goblet of Fire, when Dumbledore explains the dangers of magical shortcuts, he insists that even skilled transfiguration can have unintended consequences. A piece of false food may look, smell, and taste like nourishment, but if its magical stability wavers, it becomes poison in disguise. Imagine a hungry student, desperate during some imagined siege of Hogwarts, transfiguring a chair leg into a loaf of bread. The bread might be eaten, savoured even, but halfway through digestion, the fibres could harden into oak. Few spells could reverse such horror in time to save the victim. This is why transfiguration is not simply difficult, but terrifyingly perilous. The philosophical weight of this rule grows heavier when tied back to the question of consciousness. If an animal's awareness is suspended in some kind of magical limbo during transfiguration, what about food created from such sources? A rabbit turned into a pie, then consumed, and then restored. What would happen? Would the restored rabbit bear scars of its ordeal, or memories of suffocation in pastry form? The books never explore this, but the logic of Rowling's own system forces us to confront it. These lessons suddenly appear not as quaint demonstrations of magical skill, but as morally fraught experiments that children are expected to undertake without hesitation. One cannot help but recall Neville Longbottom's disastrous attempts in class. His botched transfigurations left creatures half-changed, grotesquely distorted between forms. In Chamber of Secrets, he turned a beetle into a button, but it retained twitching legs. Was the beetle still alive? If so, it experienced unimaginable agony, its body torn between two identities. For Neville, it was an academic embarrassment. For the beetle, it may have been living torture. These incidents reveal how lightly the wizarding world seems to treat suffering when framed as magical education. Even Hermione, the most conscientious student, accepted these lessons as natural. She protested when house elves were treated as servants, yet she never raised an eyebrow at transfiguring animals into objects. Perhaps this shows the cultural blindness of wizards who view the manipulation of matter, even living matter, as neutral. To them it is craft and discipline, but to us, peering through the cracks, it looks chilling. The rules of permanence also complicate the matter. In Half-Blood Prince, McGonagall tells her class that the vanishing spell is the most complex of all transfiguration. Vanishment involves sending matter into non-being, which is described by Dumbledore as a place into which vanished objects go. Where then does a vanished animal's consciousness go? If objects turned into animals can be restored, does that mean animals turned into objects retain some tether to their original identity? These ambiguities turn every classroom exercise into a philosophical nightmare, far more sinister than Rowling may have intended but impossible to ignore once noticed. Consider also the psychological burden on the animals used in class. Trevor, Neville's toad, is constantly the subject of failed experiments. The poor creature is stuffed into a teapot one week and nearly squashed into a pincushion the next. If Trevor has any awareness of these experiences, then Hogwarts is less a school of wonder than a place of recurring trauma for him. The fact that no student, not even sensitive Harry, ever reflects on this reveals how normalized the cruelty has become. There are echoes here of magical slavery. Just as house elves exist to serve without protest, animals are pressed into service as test subjects. The ethics are brushed aside because wizards treat their magic as mastery over nature. It mirrors our own world's disregard for animals in laboratories, where necessity and progress are used as excuses. Rowling may not have intended this comparison, but it arises naturally when we examine the darker logic of transfiguration. The greatest danger, though, lies in human experimentation. While McGonagall never asks students to transfigure one another, the possibility is acknowledged. In Goblet of Fire, when Mad-Eye Moody, really Barty Crouch Jr., turns Draco Malfoy into a ferret, McGonagall is horrified. "We never use transfiguration as a punishment," she cries, but notice what this reveals. It is possible, quick, and reversible to alter a human being into an animal. What happens to Draco's mind during those moments as a ferret? Did he feel feral instincts, or did his human consciousness remain intact, trapped in a small, panicked body? The books never say, but the implications are terrifying. If such magic exists, then the wizarding world rests upon a dangerous precipice. Entire populations could be enslaved, reshaped, or immobilized at the whim of a skilled wizard. That this power is taught in classrooms under the guise of harmless lessons only deepens the unease. For all of Dumbledore's warnings about the corrupting nature of power, he never speaks of Transfiguration's potential for abuse. Perhaps even he understood that some truths were too unsettling to voice to young minds. The strangeness of Transfiguration lies in its silence. The books give us rules, hints, and small warnings, but they never confront the full horror of what the magic entails. As readers, we accept the whimsy of a beetle turned into a button or a pincushion turned into a hedgehog without questioning what it means for the creatures involved. Yet once we pause, the questions multiply and refuse to be ignored. What is the boundary between object and being, between nourishment and poison, between harmless trick and cruel imprisonment? In the shifting shimmer of Transfiguration, these lines blur, and perhaps that is the most disturbing truth of all. Number 19. The riddle of immortal creatures. The world of Harry Potter is filled with shadows, secrets, and questions that seem to linger even after the last page of the books has been read. Among those questions is one that most readers overlook: the riddle of immortal creatures. The series introduces beings that defy ordinary life and death. Phoenixes that rise from ashes, unicorns with blood that grants cursed longevity, and even the basilisk that slumbers in the depths of Hogwarts for centuries without withering. Yet the narrative never answers directly whether these creatures are truly immortal, or whether their apparent eternity is only a temporary illusion, a shimmer of magic that eventually fades. The mystery is most vividly embodied in one creature, Fawkes, the phoenix bound to Albus Dumbledore. Fawkes is first revealed in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets as nothing more than a feeble, dying bird shivering on its perch in Dumbledore's office. Harry describes him as a plucked turkey that had been sitting in a bonfire. Moments later, the bird collapses in flames and is reborn from its ashes. This moment astonishes Harry, but for Dumbledore it is nothing unusual. He merely explains phoenixes burst into flame when it is time for them to die and are reborn from the ashes. The line carries a casual tone, as though the phoenix's cycle is as ordinary as sunrise and sunset. But if phoenixes are indeed reborn without end, the question is inevitable. Why do we only ever meet Fawkes? If an entire species shares this immortality, where are the flocks of phoenixes that should populate the skies of the magical world? The books leave this absence hauntingly unexplained. Hagrid, in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, mentions phoenixes as rare but not extinct. He describes them as beautiful, large birds with golden and scarlet plumage, creatures that sing magical songs of courage and healing tears. And yet no wizard, apart from Dumbledore, is ever shown owning or even seeing one. This odd silence creates the sense that Fawkes is not simply a magical animal, but something far stranger, a presence that appears in the life of a single wizard, bound not by biology but by destiny. It is as though Fawkes was never just another creature, but the manifestation of an idea. Loyalty, sacrifice, or perhaps even fate itself. The notion of magical creatures as living symbols rather than living species is reinforced by the role Fawkes plays in crucial events. In the Chamber of Secrets, when Harry faces the basilisk, it is Fawkes who arrives at the moment of greatest need. The bird blinds the serpent with his talons, delivers the sorting hat that carries the sword of Gryffindor, and sheds tears that save Harry's life from venom. This sequence is not a coincidence of nature, but almost a scripted act of destiny. Dumbledore himself later tells Harry, "You must have shown me real loyalty down in the chamber. That is what brought Fawkes to you." The phoenix, then, responds not as an animal would, but as a force answering to human choices, as if summoned by moral courage rather than natural instinct. This raises the unsettling question of whether Fawkes would have existed at all without Dumbledore. His presence in the headmaster's office, his song at Dumbledore's funeral, his vanishing after the old wizard's death, all suggest a bond that transcends the ordinary relationship between wizard and pet. If phoenixes were truly independent immortal beings, they should have their own territories, their own kind, their own lives apart from humans. But Fawkes behaves as if his existence is tied to the arc of Dumbledore's story. When the headmaster falls from the astronomy tower, Fawkes sings a lament so filled with grief that even hardened Death Eaters pause. Afterward, he disappears, never to be seen again. It is as though his role was finished the moment. His master's fate was sealed. This interpretation makes phoenixes into something closer to living embodiments of magic itself. They are not born, they are not bred, and they do not populate the world in any measurable way. They emerge when the story of the wizarding world demands them, when courage, sacrifice, or destiny calls them into being. Fawkes exists because Dumbledore exists, just as the basilisk exists because Salazar Slytherin willed it into being, a monster sealed within the school to reflect the founder's obsession with blood purity. These creatures are not mere wildlife. They are the myths of wizards, made flesh, walking and flying in the same halls as their creators. The basilisk is a particularly striking counterpoint. When Harry encounters the serpent in the chamber, it is described as a monster that has lived hidden for nearly 1,000 years. The basilisk was the serpent of Slytherin, bred by dark wizards and left to slumber in the bowels of the castle. But no ordinary animal, however resilient, could survive 10 centuries in solitude, emerging fully alive and deadly. Its existence suggests a different kind of immortality, the preservation of a myth. The basilisk is not simply a creature of scales and venom, but a symbol of Slytherin's hatred given physical form, frozen in time until it is unleashed again. In that sense, it mirrors Fawkes, but on the opposite side of the moral spectrum. One is born of loyalty, the other of fear. Unicorns add another layer to this mystery. Their blood, silver and shining, can prolong life even when death is imminent, though at a dreadful price. Firenze explains to Harry in the Forbidden Forest, "You have slain something pure and defenseless to save yourself, and you will have but a half-life, a cursed life." This moment implies that unicorns embody a kind of purity so absolute that even their destruction cannot be without consequence. Their immortality, then, does not lie in their endless existence, but in the permanence of their symbolism. They represent innocence, and their violation permanently marks the soul. They are immortal, not as creatures, but as concepts that cannot be erased from the fabric of the magical world. Even centaurs, though mortal, seem to move in rhythms outside ordinary time. Firenze and Bane speak of the stars as if destiny is written permanently above them, a script that no human can alter. Their kind is less about biological survival and more about embodying eternal wisdom and the burden of prophecy. They do not die on the page, but they live as timeless voices that resist human interference. Their immortality is not physical, but cultural. Their role in the story to remind wizards that some truths lie far beyond their control. The deeper one looks, the more it seems that magical creatures in Rowling's universe are less about zoology and more about narrative necessity. They do not exist to fill an ecosystem, but to test the hearts of characters, to intervene at turning points, to serve as embodiments of courage, purity, or evil. Fawkes is the spirit of rebirth and loyalty. The basilisk is the shadow of prejudice and death. Unicorns are the eternal cost of innocence lost. Centaurs are fate itself, watching from the forest. These beings may wear the skin of animals, but their lives are interwoven with the lives of wizards in ways that defy natural law. The absence of phoenix flocks, the longevity of a single serpent, the eternal warning carried by unicorn blood, all of these suggest that the question of immortality is not meant to be answered in biological terms. It is meant to remain a riddle, a reminder that the magical world operates by laws far stranger than survival or reproduction. The creatures of this world are mirrors, reflecting back to wizards their own choices, their own destinies, and the weight of their own morality. Fawkes disappears not because he dies, but because the story no longer requires him. His song lingers as memory, as myth, as the echo of magic itself. The final lament of Fawkes at Dumbledore's funeral is perhaps the most haunting example. Rowling writes, and Harry thought as he listened to the Phoenix song, that there was nothing else in the world that could have made him feel so full of grief and yet so full of comfort. This paradox captures the essence of immortal creatures. They exist not to be catalogued, but to be felt. They are immortal because they live forever in the hearts of those who witness them, because they embody truths that do not age. The Phoenix's immortality is not in endless rebirth, but in the permanence of hope it symbolizes. Thus the riddle remains unresolved, suspended between legend and reality. Were phoenixes a species, their skies would blaze with scarlet wings. Were basilisks merely serpents, they would have died long before Harry was born. Were unicorns simply animals, their blood would not curse eternity. The fact that none of these fit into natural categories tells us that their immortality is not measured in years or bodies, but in meaning. They are immortal because the magical world needs them to be. They are summoned when stories demand them, when courage falters or hatred rises, and they fade when their role is finished. Perhaps the true immortality of magical creatures lies in the same place as the immortality of wizards themselves, memory and myth. Just as Harry carries Dumbledore's lessons long after the man is gone, the echo of Fawkes's song lingers. Even though the bird has vanished, the basilisk is destroyed, but the fear of it endures. Unicorns roam unseen, yet the dread of their blood remains. These creatures live not in flocks or herds, but in the eternal space between legend and reality, where magic itself becomes alive. Number 20, excessive trust in prophecies. The prophecy that Sybil Trelawney pronounced in the shabby room above the Hog's Head Inn stood like a ghostly shadow over the entire saga of Harry Potter. Her words, delivered in a trance-like state, shaped the future of the wizarding world, not because of their inherent power, but because of how others responded to them. "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approach it," she said, and with that fate appeared to be sealed. Yet if one looks more closely, one realizes that the prophecy itself carried no direct magic, no binding force upon Voldemort or Harry. Instead, the prophecy functioned as a mirror of human belief, a dangerous reflection of how much weight wizards were willing to give to such foretellings. The story of Harry Potter teaches us, in its quiet undercurrents, that it is not prophecy itself that rules destinies, but the decisions made in response to it. Trelawney's credibility was, for much of her teaching career, laughably low. Students remembered her constant claims that disaster was just around the corner. Lavender Brown's rabbit was supposedly doomed to die on a particular day, and when it happened later, under unrelated circumstances, Trelawney claimed triumph. She predicted Harry's death nearly every year he studied divination, and yet Harry always walked out of her classroom alive. Most of her predictions were comically inaccurate or overly dramatic. Hermione Granger, who left the subject in disgust, once remarked, "Divination is a very woolly discipline. It is striking." Then that when one prophecy finally caught the ear of Voldemort, the wizarding world shifted on its axis. How is it that a woman known for her blunders suddenly became the architect of destiny? The answer lies not in the power of prophecy, but in the power of belief. Voldemort, overhearing part of the prophecy through Severus Snape, reacted instantly. He feared the possibility that a child born at the end of July could bring about his downfall. By acting upon those words, he ensured their relevance. The prophecy itself was incomplete when Voldemort chose his course, but his choice gave the words shape and permanence. In other words, the prophecy would have been powerless had it remained unheard, buried in the smoky air of the Hog's Head. It is Voldemort's decision, driven by his paranoia, that transformed empty words into the cornerstone of the Second Wizarding War. This paradox raises unsettling questions. If Voldemort had ignored the prophecy, what then? A prophecy unacknowledged holds no influence. It is mere sound fading into silence. The tragedy lies in the self-fulfilling mechanism. By marking Harry as his equal, Voldemort placed the weight of destiny upon an infant who might otherwise have lived an ordinary life. Dumbledore himself admitted this truth when he explained to Harry, "Do you see? The prophecy does not mean you have to do anything, but Voldemort now knows you are the one he must hunt. Without his decision, it could have been Neville, it could have been no one." In this admission we see how fragile the threads of fate truly were, dependent entirely upon Voldemort's fear. The blind faith in prophecy is not unique to Voldemort. Wizards throughout the series exhibit a strange reverence for predictions, as though words spoken in trance carry an authority beyond reason. Dumbledore, though more skeptical than most, still treated the prophecy as a dangerous object that required protection. He placed it in the Hall of Prophecies, locked away among countless other glass orbs in the Department of Mysteries. This very act reinforced the idea that prophecies were precious truths worthy of safeguarding. When Harry and his friends fought to protect the prophecy in the fifth book, they were risking their lives for words that ultimately were only true because Voldemort believed in them. Their struggle itself was proof of how deeply ingrained this faith was within the wizarding community. Even Snape's fateful choice to relay what he heard demonstrates the weight given to Trelawney's words. He overheard only the first half, yet even that fragment was enough to send Voldemort into action. Here lies the frightening simplicity. Prophecies require belief to function. Voldemort's actions illustrate that the greatest danger was not in the prophecy itself, but in his reaction to it. He became the prophecy's own executioner, carrying it into reality by his obsession with survival and domination. Thus the story reveals a disturbing truth about the psychology of power. Those who fear a prediction may, in their attempts to avoid it, ensure its fulfillment. Harry's own journey was shaped by this heavy inheritance. From his earliest years at Hogwarts, he was told he was special, not because of his talents alone, but because of what had been foretold. The prophecy became a silent presence in his life, dictating how others viewed him. He was not simply Harry, but the chosen one. Yet, as Dumbledore insisted, Harry retained choice, could choose how to act, and what distinguished him from Voldemort was his willingness to love, to sacrifice, to embrace humanity. Still, one must ask how much of Harry's identity was formed by the knowledge of prophecy, and how much was his own free will. The line blurs uncomfortably when we realize that Harry often acted out of duty, feeling chained to a destiny he did not ask for. It is telling that when Harry finally faced Voldemort in the Forbidden Forest, he did so not because the prophecy forced him, but because he chose to. Neither can live while the other survives, the prophecy had declared. Yet Harry's acceptance of death was not an act of submission to prophecy, but an act of personal conviction. He walked into the forest because he valued his friends and the survival of their world. This distinction is critical. Prophecy predicted a confrontation, but Harry's moral choice gave it meaning. Prophecy framed the battlefield, but it did not dictate Harry's courage. Throughout the saga, Rowling threads a quiet commentary on the human hunger for certainty. Prophecies offer the illusion of control, a glimpse into the unknown. Wizards cling to them because they fear chaos, because they crave order. Yet the irony is that their reliance on prophecy creates the very chaos they dread. The Ministry stored thousands of prophecies, yet did not recognize the danger of treating them as immutable truth. In their attempt to preserve the words of seers, they gave them permanence, a permanence that could be exploited by those desperate for power. The case of Neville Longbottom further illustrates the arbitrary nature of prophecy. The words of Trelawney could have referred to either Harry or Neville. Both were born at the end of July. Both had parents who defied Voldemort 3 times. Fate balanced precariously between them, waiting only for Voldemort's interpretation. His decision to target Harry sealed Neville's reprieve and Harry's burden. Had he chosen differently, the saga might have followed Neville, the unlikely hero. This chance selection exposes prophecy as not a truth carved in stone, but as a fragile narrative constructed by choice and circumstance. One cannot help but notice that Trelawney herself faded back into obscurity after the prophecy. Her teaching remained laughable, her reputation weak. She returned to predicting doom at every turn, clinging to sherry bottles and vague claims. The woman whose words had defined a war was treated again as a fraud. This contrast underscores the paradox. The same community that mocked her believed her when it suited their fears. It suggests that belief in prophecy is selective, guided not by rationality but by emotion. Wizards accept or dismiss predictions based on convenience, a dangerous inconsistency that allows superstition to shape history. Dumbledore, more than anyone, recognized this danger. He told Harry plainly, "It is not the prophecy that makes you the chosen one, it is Voldemort." His wisdom lies in stripping prophecy of its mystical authority and exposing it as nothing more than words, powerless without human action. Yet even he could not entirely free himself from its influence. His decisions to prepare Harry to guide him towards sacrifice were shaded by the knowledge of what had been foretold. Thus, even Dumbledore, the great skeptic, fell prey to the gravitational pull of prophecy. The larger question remains, why do wizards, and by extension we, invest so much in prophecy? Perhaps because it absolves responsibility. If destiny is written, then one need only follow. Choices become less terrifying when framed as inevitable. But Harry Potter's story reveals the opposite. Choice, not prophecy, defines character. Voldemort's downfall was not caused by words spoken in a trance, but by his own obsession, his inability to love, and his fear of mortality. Harry's triumph came not from being the one with the power, but from his willingness to act with compassion. Prophecy was merely the stage, the actors chose the play. Thus, the excessive trust placed in prophecy within the Harry Potter universe emerges as a cautionary theme. It is not the prophecy that commands fate, but belief in it. The war against Voldemort was not fought because Trelawney spoke, but because Voldemort listened. His terror gave the words life, and his choices chained him to their outcome. In the end, Harry's journey reminds us that destiny is not delivered by prophecy but forged by choice, and that the most dangerous magic of all may be the human willingness to let words define reality. Number 21, the mystery of Avada Kedavra, Aitiao. Of all the spells in the Harry Potter universe, none chills the imagination more than the killing curse, Avada Kedavra. This curse is whispered in the corridors of Hogwarts and feared in every corner of the wizarding world. It is classified as one of the 3 unforgivable curses, but the lingering question remains: why does such a spell even exist? The magical community developed charms to heal, protect, and even transfigure entire landscapes, yet here is a spell designed with the sole purpose of ending life instantly. To truly understand its presence, one must look into its origins, its intent, and the hidden implications that shadow its green flash of light. Legends within the magical community suggest that Avada Kedavra is not a modern invention, but a relic of darker ages when wizards sought control not only over life, but also over the memory of death itself. Unlike a simple blade or a curse causing bodily harm, Avada Kedavra leaves no visible mark. The body falls lifeless, but there is no wound, no struggle, only silence. This property alone hints that its creator was not interested in mere murder, but in erasure. In a world of political intrigue and wizarding families that rose and fell on power struggles, a death without evidence was the perfect tool for those who wished to hide their crimes. Imagine a council chamber in the medieval wizarding world where rivals vanished overnight, leaving behind no trace of violence, no proof of treachery, only whispers. The fact that it is unforgivable is revealing in itself. Many spells can be twisted toward lethal ends. A simple Petrificus Totalis cast on someone standing at a tower window could send them plunging to their death. A well-aimed Reducto might destroy a bridge while an enemy is crossing. Yet these acts are not automatically unforgivable, even though they lead to murder. Why then is Avada Kedavra uniquely condemned? It is because the curse embodies pure intent to kill, unadorned by circumstance, strategy, or chance. The caster wills only death, and the magic fulfills it. As Dumbledore once explained to Harry, you are protected, in short, by your ability to love, being a reminder that the curse requires absolute hatred or cold detachment to function. Its immorality is embedded in its very design. There is also the haunting possibility that Avada Kedavra does not simply kill, but annihilates. The wizarding world is filled with references to souls and the afterlife. Dementors consume fragments of souls, Horcruxes fracture them, and the resurrection stone calls back echoes of the dead. If Avada Kedavra severs life without leaving scars, might it also sever the soul more violently than natural death? When Harry saw Cedric Diggory fall in the graveyard, the body lay whole, yet the abruptness of the loss conveyed an emptiness that natural death rarely holds. The curse leaves behind a hollow silence, as though something deeper has been ripped away. Perhaps this is why the Ministry of Magic marks it as unforgivable, not merely because it kills, but because it erases. The etymology of the curse strengthens this idea. Scholars of ancient Aramaic point to the phrase Avra Kedabra, meaning I create as I speak. The twisted variation of Avada Kedavra could mean I destroy as I speak. This inversion is not random, it symbolizes a deliberate act of perverting the creative essence of magic into a destructive void, Whoever coined the curse was not simply crafting a weapon, but was crafting an ultimate denial of existence. In that sense, Avada Kedavra is a philosophy as much as a spell. It declares that life and memory can be extinguished with a word, and that destruction can be made clean without consequence. Consider the use of the curse in modern times, most infamously by Lord Voldemort. He wielded it without hesitation, striking down James and Lily Potter, and later countless others. When he cast it at Harry in the Forbidden Forest, the forest echoed not with violence, but with silence, the flash of green consuming all sound. The curse suited Voldemort not merely because it killed, but because it reflected his ideology. Voldemort did not wish to leave marks, explanations, or reasons. He wanted to instill terror through the very idea that a person could vanish from life in a blink, stripped of dignity and stripped of trace. In this, he echoed the motives of those ancient conspirators who may have first birthed the spell. It is important to contrast this with other spells capable of harm. Sectum Sempra, a curse invented by Severus Snape, slashes its victim with deep wounds, but the injuries are visible, tangible, and could even be healed. Expelliarmus, used in certain circumstances, can disarm and expose someone to mortal danger, yet it is not inherently lethal. The killing curse, by contrast, offers no defensive wound, no sign of conflict, only the eerie stillness of a life extinguished without struggle. As Moody warned in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Avada Kedavra's a curse that needs a powerful bit of magic behind it. You could all get your wands out now and point them at me and say the words, and I doubt I'd get so much as a nosebleed. Its very difficulty ensures that only those with strong intent can cast it, making its existence both terrifying and enigmatic. If intent is central to the curse, then its morality becomes even more complicated. Magic in the wizarding world is often a reflection of the caster's will. Patronus charms require joy, Cruciatus demands genuine malice, and Avada Kedavra demands the focused desire for death. The reason why Petrificus Totalis followed by a shove is not classified as unforgivable is because the spell itself is not inherently murderous. It is the action following it that leads to death. Avada Kedavra, however, begins and ends with killing. The caster speaks, the wand channels, the victim falls. There is no ambiguity, no space for justification. That is why it cannot be forgiven. The intent is absolute. Yet this raises a disturbing question. If Avada Kedavra erases life without trace, might its deeper crime be that it denies the human soul's journey? Dumbledore often spoke of death as the next great adventure, but if the killing curse annihilates the essence of a person rather than releasing it, then it is not merely murder, but obliteration. It is a crime against the very order of the magical universe, a theft not just of breath but of eternity. Perhaps that is the hidden reason why the Ministry set it apart, why wizards instinctively recoil at its name. Other murders leave grief and evidence. Avada Kedavra leaves only absence. The secrecy surrounding its history also adds to the suspicion that it was never meant for open warfare, but for silent elimination. Wars in the wizarding world have always involved destructive spells, fiendfire, confringo, and blasting curses that tear through walls and battlements. But Avada Kedavra appears in whispers, in chambers where witnesses are few. Think of the assassination of Amelia Bones, described in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, as a nasty business, very nasty. It looks like they knew what they were doing because once again there was no sign of a struggle, no sign of the cause of death. The implication is clear. The curse thrives in conspiracy, in silence, in the world of plots rather than battlefields. One cannot ignore the psychological power of the curse. To hear the words Avada Kedavra and see the green jet of light is to know that hope is gone. There is no counter-curse, no shield charm that can repel it. The knowledge that there is no defense makes it the ultimate instrument of fear. Voldemort used it as a symbol of inevitability, a way of convincing his followers and enemies alike that resistance was futile. In this sense, Avada Kedavra was as much a weapon of terror as it was of murder. Its reputation alone bends the will of those who might otherwise resist. The Ministry's prohibition on the curse is thus not only a legal restriction but also a moral statement. By labeling it unforgivable, the wizarding world draws a line in the sand. Certain acts are beyond excuse, no matter the reason. Even if one could argue self-defense or desperation, the fact that Avada Kedavra requires absolute intent to kill strips away any claim of necessity. To cast it is to declare oneself in opposition to the values of the magical community, to embrace a philosophy of annihilation. That is why auras are permitted to use deadly force in battle, but still forbidden from using this curse. It is not about the outcome, but about the principle it embodies. In the end, the mystery of Avada Kedavra is not simply about its lethality, but about its symbolism. It represents the darkest capability of magic, the power to erase without trace, to silence without explanation, to destroy without leaving behind even the dignity of scars. Its existence reminds us that the magical world is not only about wonder and creation, but also about the terrifying choices of those who sought to bend power toward emptiness. When Harry faced Voldemort in the Great Hall, the clash of Avada Kedavra against Expelliarmus was more than a duel of spells. It was the collision of two worldviews, one of annihilation and one of disarming, one of void and one of survival. The green light met the red, and for a moment, the fate of not only Harry but the very idea of life's sanctity hung in the balance. The curse endures in memory precisely because it forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. Why does such a spell exist at all? Why did ancient wizards feel the need to craft such a clean, empty death? Perhaps the answer lies not in the spell but in ourselves. The desire for absolute control, the temptation to wield power that leaves no consequence. Avada Kedavra is not just an unforgivable curse. It is a mirror held up to the darkest corners of human ambition, where the silence after the green light is more terrifying than the scream that never came. Number 22. Why did nobody check Harry's broom? When Harry Potter unwrapped the gleaming Nimbus 2001 in Chamber of Secrets, the atmosphere in the Gryffindor common room seemed to ignite with awe. The gift was extraordinary, the very broomstick coveted by the entire Slytherin team. Even Professor McGonagall, usually stern and composed, could not disguise a flicker of admiration at the sight of such a marvel. J.K. Rowling notes, "It was the most splendid broom Harry had ever seen. In fact, it was the most splendid broom he had ever laid eyes on." Yet behind the wonder lingers a question that is rarely asked. Why did no one stop to examine the broom for enchantments or curses? A boy famous for being the target of dark wizards had just been handed a powerful magical object, yet the assumption was that generosity, not malice, stood behind the gift. The danger of broomsticks is not theoretical in the wizarding world. A broom is not just wood and twigs. It is a vessel of magical engineering capable of enormous speed and maneuverability. One wrong spell woven into its fibers could turn a joyful flight into catastrophe. We already saw this in Philosopher's Stone when Harry's broom suddenly bucked and tried to throw him off during his first Quidditch match. Hermione, observing the commotion, suspected Professor Snape and in an act of desperation set fire to his robes to break his concentration. What she later discovered was chilling. It had not been Snape at all. but Professor Quirrell, muttering a curse with his eyes locked on Harry. The boy had nearly plummeted to his death from a sabotaged broom, and it required quick thinking and extraordinary courage from his friend to save him. This incident alone should have been a wake-up call for the Hogwarts staff. The fact that a teacher could so easily hex a broom in front of thousands of spectators with no protective wards catching the spell demonstrates the alarming fragility of magical safeguards at the school. If a broom could be tampered with mid-flight, how much easier would it be to lace one with dark charms before gifting it to an unsuspecting student? A Nimbus 2001 in the hands of Harry Potter was not just sporting equipment, it was potentially a ticking time bomb. Yet the administration seemed more preoccupied with Quidditch glory and inter-house rivalry than with the fundamental duty of keeping children safe. The strangeness of the Nimbus 2001 gift becomes sharper when one recalls its supposed benefactor. In the book, it is Lucius Malfoy who donates a full set of Nimbus 2001s to the Slytherin team, effectively buying Draco's place as Seeker. The broom Harry receives later is written as part of the narrative tension between wealth, favoritism, and true skill. But in context, one has to ask, if Lucius Malfoy could so brazenly equip an entire team with enchanted broomsticks, why could not a more sinister figure slip one broom into Gryffindor hands with hidden curses? Lucius himself had already planted Tom Riddle's diary on Ginny Weasley that same year, a cursed artifact carrying a fragment of Voldemort's soul. The diary slipped into the school undetected, wreaking havoc and unleashing the basilisk on unsuspecting students. If a book could bypass all security, why not a broom? The negligence lies not only in failing to test Harry's Nimbus, but in a wider pattern of complacency. Hogwarts is repeatedly shown as a place where potentially lethal magical objects circulate freely among students. From self-playing enchanted instruments to bewitched sweets, little effort is made to control what enters the castle. But when it comes to broomsticks, the stakes are even higher. These objects are not toys but precision instruments that can carry a child at breakneck speed hundreds of feet into the air. A single curse that disables balance or overrides control could mean instant death. The Quidditch pitch, filled with students cheering their house, could so easily become a stage for tragedy. One must remember that in Chamber of Secrets the atmosphere at Hogwarts was already tense. The mysterious attacks on students had begun, the walls bore the chilling message, "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened, enemies of the air, beware." Rumors circulated daily about dark forces infiltrating the school. Under such circumstances, it would have been natural to exercise extra caution. Yet when Harry unveiled his broom, the concern was not about potential enchantments, but about jealousy. Ron expressed admiration tinged with envy. Hermione worried more about fairness than about safety. And even McGonagall's primary reaction was pride that her Seeker would have an advantage. In this moment, the real threat was invisible, hidden beneath the veneer of excitement. The precedent of broom sabotage had already been written into Hogwarts history. Quirrell's attempt was not a one-time anomaly. Magical texts in the series repeatedly note that broomsticks, like wands, are vulnerable to tampering. A hex placed on the handle could misdirect steering. A curse on the bristles could destabilize balance. Even a jinx delaying response time could prove fatal in a high-speed chase. Quidditch teams in the professional world employed enchanters and inspectors precisely to ensure the integrity of their gear before a match. Yet at Hogwarts, where children flew high above stone walls and towering stands, there was no sign of similar inspections. The absence of protocol is shocking. This negligence becomes even more disturbing when paired with Dumbledore's philosophy of trust. Throughout the books, he is portrayed as a headmaster who believes in giving students independence, often to the point of recklessness. "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are," he once told his pupil. "But when choices are made on equipment that might be cursed, trust turns from wisdom into negligence." Allowing a 12-year-old boy to fly on an untested Nimbus 2001 in an environment already infiltrated by dark magic borders on irresponsibility. The safety net that should exist between child and danger was conspicuously absent. Hermione, as often, provided the lone voice of caution. When she saw the broom, she did not cheer. Instead, she questioned the logic behind the gift. "You know what I think," she told Ron in the book, "that someone's trying to get rid of Harry Potter." While the line was meant partly in jest, her suspicion captures what the adults seem to miss. Hermione understood that nothing in Harry's life was ordinary. Every object, every gesture of kindness might carry hidden malice. It was this instinct that saved Harry time and again, and yet the school that should have taught vigilance was instead swept away by the glamour of luxury. Consider also the symbolism of the broomstick. For Harry, flight represented freedom, escape from the cupboard under the stairs, and a talent uniquely his own. Voldemort and his allies would know how deeply this passion ran. To corrupt that very source of joy with a curse would not only threaten Harry's life, but also his spirit. It would be the perfect act of cruelty, a way to rob the boy of his sanctuary in the sky. That such an obvious avenue of attack remained unguarded speaks volumes about the blind spots in the wizarding world's defenses. When reflecting on Hogwarts' failures, one cannot ignore the systemic disregard for child safety woven throughout the narrative. A basilisk roamed the pipes, a murderous werewolf taught defense against the dark arts, dementors hovered over the grounds, and a cursed artifact sat in a girl's school bag. The unchecked broomstick is part of this larger pattern, a reminder that the magical world often underestimated the cunning of dark forces. In such a context, the lack of broom inspections feels less like an oversight and more like a symptom of a wider culture of denial. Wizards trusted tradition and intuition far more than precaution. It is telling that professional Quidditch took precautions that Hogwarts ignored. Before major matches, referees conducted detailed inspections of brooms, checking for tampering. Jinx detection spells were routine, and some leagues even required players to use certified equipment. The contrast between professional standards and the laissez-faire approach at Hogwarts is striking. If adults competing in sport deserved protection, surely children competing at school deserved more, and yet the fame of Harry Potter seemed to obscure this reality. He was the boy who lived, the prodigy seeker, the symbol of Gryffindor. To some he appeared invincible, but in truth he was still just a boy, fragile in body though strong in spirit. The gift of the Nimbus 2001 ultimately became a plot device to highlight rivalry, not suspicion. Draco's sneer, the Gryffindor's admiration, Hermione's frustration, all fed into the drama of Quidditch and school politics. But beneath the story lies the unanswered question, what if? What if the broom had been cursed, not by Quirrell mid-match, but by an unseen hand long before it reached Harry's arms? Would the golden boy of Gryffindor have fallen lifeless onto the pitch, another casualty of the war no one wanted to acknowledge? The narrative leaves this possibility hanging, unsettling in its silence. The oversight in testing Harry's broom is not just a quirk of storytelling, but a window into the ethos of the wizarding world. It reveals a society that prizes bravery above caution, spectacle above safety, and destiny above duty. For readers, the Nimbus 2001 becomes more than a broom. It is a mirror reflecting the dangerous complacency that allowed dark magic to flourish within Hogwarts walls, it is a reminder that sometimes the greatest threats are not hidden in dungeons or forests, but in the gifts we accept without question. Number 23, Secrets of Family Relics. Of all the mysteries surrounding Harry Potter's world, the notion of family relics stands out as one of the most neglected and yet one of the most haunting. The wizarding world thrives on tradition, and traditions often bind themselves to objects. The Blacks had their infamous tapestry tracing bloodlines and betrayals. Gryffindor carried a sword that would later rest in Dumbledore's office, and the Potters held in their possession what looked like a simple cloak, but was, in truth, one of the most extraordinary magical artifacts ever created. These objects were not simply heirlooms, they were vessels of power and memory, embodiments of legacy. Yet what stirs unease is not merely their existence, but the way in which they were overlooked, underestimated, or even forgotten by those who should have cherished their potential. The invisibility cloak of the Potters is the most glaring example. Readers discover alongside Harry that this cloak is not just an ordinary artifact, but one of the fabled Deathly Hallows, and Death most unwillingly handed over his own cloak of invisibility, as recounted in The Tales of Beedle the Bard. This cloak was not woven from any material known to man, but from Death's very own fabric, a shield that could hide the wearer not only from mortal eyes, but from the probing spells and enchantments of the most skilled witches and wizards. Its significance is so profound that Albus Dumbledore, who himself possessed it for a short time, admitted he was tempted by the Hallows, unable to resist their allure. Yet despite such weight, James and Lily Potter never used it in the way readers would expect, never as a last defense against Voldemort, never as a safeguard for their doomed knight in Godric's Hollow. This paradox raises troubling questions. Why did James, who once borrowed the cloak to sneak into Hogsmeade, not hide himself and Lily beneath it when Voldemort came? Why did Dumbledore, who suspected Voldemort's intentions, never encourage them to treat it as a final bastion? Instead, the Potters relied on the Fidelius charm, a spell of secrecy so powerful it bound the truth of their location to the soul of a single man, Peter Pettigrew. This choice cost them their lives, for Pettigrew betrayed them to Voldemort without hesitation. The cloak, lying folded and unused, outlived them all. It is chilling to realize that survival was quite literally within their reach, and yet it was left hanging in a cupboard. The negligence of the Potters is not an isolated case. Throughout the books, Rowling paints a world where magical relics are rarely understood for what they are. The Gaunt family, descendants of Salazar Slytherin, possessed a simple ring. To outsiders, it was a worthless piece of jewelry, cracked and unremarkable, yet this ring was both a Horcrux containing a fragment of Voldemort's soul and the Resurrection Stone, the second of the Deathly Hallows. Marvolo Gaunt flaunted it as if it were nothing more than a trinket proving his pure blood heritage. He failed to grasp that in his hands was an object that, combined with the cloak and the Elder Wand, could grant mastery over death itself. Such blindness cost his line its dignity, and eventually their lives. Consider also the Locket of Slytherin, another relic whose destiny was twisted by neglect and obsession. At one point, it was treasured in the home of the Gaunts, then sold by Merop Gaunt in desperation, only to fall into the hands of Hepzibah Smith, and finally to be corrupted by Voldemort into a Horcrux. Each stage of its journey illustrates the failure of its keepers to see what it truly was. They saw only wealth, pride, or ornamentation, while the deeper power lay dormant until it was twisted by evil. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione carried the locket across the countryside in the Deathly Hallows, Its malevolent presence consumed their thoughts, breeding paranoia and anger. The locket was beating like a heart, and it was malign, Rowling describes, showing how even fragments of ancient relics could warp human will. The sword of Godric Gryffindor follows a similar pattern of misjudgment. Imbued with goblin craftsmanship, it had the ability to absorb that which strengthened it, as it did when it drank the venom of a basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets. This act made it one of the few weapons capable of destroying Horcruxes, yet the sword spent years as a display piece, mounted in Dumbledore's office as though it were no more than a symbol of house pride. Only in dire necessity did its true power reveal itself. Even then, the Ministry of Magic tried to seize it, ignorant of its unique abilities, and placed a fake sword in its vault. The real blade had slipped quietly into hiding, waiting for a worthy Gryffindor to summon it in their moment of need. These stories underscore the recurring truth. Wizards consistently underestimate the relics they inherit. They rely on spells, charms, and dueling skills, ignoring the dormant might of objects steeped in centuries of enchantment. The Black family tapestry, for example, might appear as nothing more than a genealogical record, but the tapestry also bore the marks of curses, hexes, and the obsessive pride of a pure-blood dynasty, a symbolic map of prejudice that shaped generations. The family likely never realized that in preserving it, they had preserved a kind of dark magic binding their identity and shaping destinies. Sirius loathed the tapestry, but admitted that it reflected the iron hold of his family's beliefs. Returning to the cloak, the central irony remains painful. Dumbledore himself once reflected to Harry, "Your father used to wear it. It seems to me it is time it was returned to you." This line from the Philosopher's Stone echoes like a riddle. What did James use it for? Mischief, adventure, and pranks. What did Harry use it for? Exploration, concealment, the occasional duel with authority. It was never fully harnessed until Harry, walking into the Forbidden Forest to face Voldemort in the Deathly Hallows, draped it over himself not to escape, but to confront death with the quiet courage of his ancestor, Ignotus Peverell. The relic's ultimate purpose was not flight, but acceptance. And yet, one cannot ignore the tragic reality. Had James and Lily used it differently, Harry's story might never have begun. The suggestion that countless other relics may lie forgotten in vaults or crumbling manor houses adds to this eerie tension. Families like the Malfoys or the Carrows may hoard artifacts whose properties are untested. The Ministry of Magic itself has a department of mysteries filled with items that defy explanation, some of which may be relics abandoned by bloodlines too ignorant to value them. In The Half-Blood Prince, Rowling mentions that Borgin and Burkes trafficked in dark artifacts, many of which carried curses powerful enough to maim or kill. How many of these were heirlooms casually sold by heirs who never realized what they had? It is worth remembering how even the most unassuming relics shape destinies. The diary of Tom Riddle, seemingly a schoolboy's notebook, was in fact a Horcrux, one of the most dangerous magical items Harry ever faced. Lucius Malfoy slipped it into Ginny Weasley's cauldron without understanding the full scope of what it was. Only when Harry stabbed it with a basilisk fang in the Chamber of Secrets was the evil within destroyed. A relic, dismissed as worthless, nearly resurrected the Dark Lord. Again, ignorance of inherited objects became an instrument of fate. The pattern is unmistakable. Wizards inherit power they do not understand, and in their blindness they invite destruction. The Potter's invisibility cloak was an unparalleled safeguard, yet left unused in their hour of need. The Gaunt's ring was both cursed and holy, reduced to a bauble of pride. The sword of Gryffindor, a weapon against darkness, was treated as decoration. The locket, the diary, even the tapestry, each relic was underestimated until its true nature erupted in fire and blood. These are not accidents of plot. They are woven into the very fabric of wizarding culture, where pride and carelessness often blind families to their own treasures. One cannot help but imagine what still lurks in shadow. A chest locked in a black family attic, a brooch worn by a forgotten ancestor, a cup gathering dust in a goblin vault, objects infused with enchantments no one has spoken of in centuries. Perhaps they wait for someone desperate enough, curious enough, or reckless enough to uncover them. If the Potters, Gryffindors, Gaunts, and Blacks left behind such legacies, who is to say that other families have not done the same? The wizarding world is full of secrets, and secrets cling most tightly to the things people dismiss as ordinary. Ultimately, the cloak serves as the emblem of this entire theme. It was designed to conceal, but it also concealed its own truth. It appeared as fabric, nothing more, but within its folds lay the oldest magic of all, the magic of death itself. That James and Lily ignored it does not diminish its power. It only highlights the recurring tragedy of wizards underestimating their own inheritance. Harry, by contrast, learned to use it in the way it was meant, not to avoid confrontation, but to walk into destiny unflinching. The true danger, then, is not the relic itself, but the blindness of those who hold it. In this sense, relics are less about the magic they contain and more about the people who inherit them. They reflect not just history, but choice, ignorance, and sometimes arrogance. They wait patiently in cupboards, vaults, and ruins until the day someone recognizes them for what they are. And when that day comes, the world shifts, as it did when Harry Potter first threw the cloak over his shoulders and stepped into a story that would alter the fate of all wizardkind. Number 24. Random victims of magic. In the magical world, the concept of danger is not only tied to dark wizards or ferocious beasts, but also to the unpredictable consequences of everyday spells. Hogwarts itself, a school meant to protect and educate, was filled with moments where accidents lurked behind every incantation. A simple charm like Wingardium Leviosa, first introduced to young witches and wizards in their very first year, could easily turn into disaster if miscast. We recall Seamus Finnegan, who repeatedly managed to blow up feathers, glasses, and even his own eyebrows. Imagine the collateral damage if his mishaps had taken place on a staircase or near an open window. These accidents, though humorous in the books, remind us that the line between a harmless mistake and a tragic accident was frighteningly thin in the world J.K. Rowling created. One of the most overlooked details in the Harry Potter series is how close Neville Longbottom came to serious harm on multiple occasions, not because of Voldemort, but because of sheer clumsiness combined with magic. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Neville is described as losing control of his broomstick during Madam Hooch's first flying lesson. Neville, who had been nervous and jumpy, kicked off too hard and shot straight into the air with his arms flailing. He ended up breaking his wrist when he fell. This was not the result of dark magic, but of a poorly executed command. If something as routine as flying lessons could lead to broken bones, then one must wonder how many unnamed students suffered injuries never reported in the narrative. Hogwarts' hospital wing was always full, which suggests that the number of small casualties was far greater than what we were shown. Spells designed for dueling were even more dangerous. The ever-popular Expelliarmus, Harry's signature spell, was harmless only in theory. A wand flying out of someone's hand might seem like a minor inconvenience, but what if the victim was standing on a ledge or near sharp objects? A disarming charm could cause an opponent to stumble backward into a wall or tumble down a staircase. Harry himself once disarmed Professor Snape in The Prisoner of Azkaban, causing Snape's wand to fly out of reach. Had these duel taken place in a less controlled environment, Snape could have been gravely injured. It is unsettling to consider how often students used such spells casually in corridors, classrooms, or secret gatherings without regard for the collateral risks. When discussing accidental victims, we cannot ignore Stupefy, the stunning spell. In the 5th book, members of Dumbledore's army practiced it repeatedly in the Room of Requirement. Harry was delighted when Neville managed to stun a dummy successfully, but a misfired or poorly aimed Stupefy could have been fatal. The spell's very nature, knocking a person unconscious instantly, creates a risk of secondary harm. An unconscious body falling onto stone floors, into fireplaces, or into water would have devastating consequences. The books describe these practices as exhilarating, yet behind the cheerful tone lingers the question of whether some young witches and wizards left these sessions bruised, concussed, or permanently scarred. The danger was not confined to Hogwarts. Wizarding duels outside of school often erupted in crowded environments. In the Deathly Hallows, when Death Eaters attacked during Bill and Fleur's wedding, curses and jinxes flew across the marquee. Guests ducked for cover, but what of the non-combatants who were not fast enough? A stray Cruciatus curse or Sectum Sempra might not discriminate between fighter and bystander. The chaos of magical battles suggests that random victims were inevitable. Even at the Ministry of Magic, during Harry's confrontation with Lucius Malfoy and Bellatrix Lestrange, glass spheres exploded all around them. It was sheer luck that Hermione, Neville, and the others survived with injuries that were not fatal. If such scenes played out regularly in wizarding conflicts, then the number of casualties outside the main storyline must have been staggering. Another overlooked category of victims were Muggles, who had no defences at all. Consider the attack at the Quidditch World Cup in the Goblet of Fire. Death Eaters stormed the camp, levitating Muggle caretakers high into the air, twisting them upside down. Mr. Roberts and his family, who ran the campsite, were humiliated and traumatized. Later, Arthur Weasley explained to Harry that their memories had to be wiped. We had to use a memory charm on Mr. Roberts, of course. What he did not mention was the long-term psychological toll such incidents might have taken. Even if memory was altered, what about the emotional aftershocks that could not be so easily erased? A Muggle who suddenly wakes with a fractured arm, a missing tooth, or unexplained scars would surely feel confusion and fear. The Ministry's use of memory charms was a bandage, not a cure, for the deeper damage inflicted by magical recklessness. Accidental victims were also the result of magical creatures roaming the wizarding world. In the Chamber of Secrets, Hagrid's love for unusual beasts put multiple students at risk. The incident with the baby dragon Norbert, smuggled through Hogwarts in the dead of night, demonstrated how unprepared children were for handling dangerous creatures. Later, Aragog's enormous brood nearly devoured Harry and Ron in the Forbidden Forest. Even Hagrid's care of magical creatures lessons, which involved blast-ended scroots and hippogriffs, regularly left students burnt, cut, or traumatized. Draco Malfoy's injury at the claws of Buckbeak nearly sparked a diplomatic incident, but how many other unnamed children bore scratches, burns, or worse? These were not battles against Voldemort, but lessons gone wrong. The Statute of Secrecy was created precisely to contain the consequences of such accidents, but its existence implies that these accidents happened often. If the Ministry had to maintain an entire department of obliviators, then memory wiping was not a rare procedure, but a daily necessity. Each obliviator sent to modify the memory of a Muggle family represented a story never told, a bystander who glimpsed too much of the magical world. How many shopkeepers, bus drivers, or neighbors saw wizards apparating or dueling in alleyways, only to have their recollections erased? The world we read about hints at countless invisible victims whose lives were altered without their consent. In one chilling example, Harry and Dudley were attacked by Dementors in the Order of the Phoenix. Dudley, a Muggle with no understanding of what was happening, was nearly kissed, an act that would have destroyed his soul. This moment demonstrates that magical beings did not distinguish between wizard and Muggle when hunting. Dudley survived only because Harry managed a Patronus. How many other Muggles encountered Dementors, giants, or rogue spells without a wizard nearby to save them? Dudley's case was written because it involved Harry. The unnamed others remain in the shadows of imagination, their tragedies erased by magic or hidden by secrecy. Even wizards themselves could become unintended casualties of their own community's negligence. Think of Katie Bell in The Half-Blood Prince, who accidentally touched a cursed necklace meant for Dumbledore. She screamed, rose into the air, and had to be rushed to St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries. Katie was not the target, only a random victim caught in someone else's plot. Similarly, Ron Weasley was nearly killed when he swallowed poisoned mead destined for Dumbledore. These accidents highlight how often ordinary individuals bore the consequences of schemes far larger than themselves. St. Mungo's itself is proof that magical accidents were widespread. The hospital specialized not only in spell damage but also in misfired charms and magical creature bites. When Harry visited in the Order of the Phoenix, he encountered people who had been cursed or injured through seemingly minor mistakes. One witch had been afflicted by a misfired charm that left her covered in fur. Another man was trapped with horns sprouting from his head. These glimpses into the hospital's wards suggest that for every epic battle against dark forces, hundreds of smaller tragedies unfolded quietly, unseen by the main characters, but deeply real for those involved. Even Fred and George Weasley's experiments produced collateral damage. Their joke shop inventions, skiving snack boxes, portable swamps, or Peruvian instant darkness powder, could easily cause harm to someone unaware of their effects. During their rebellious acts against Dolores Umbridge, fireworks exploded across classrooms, narrowly missing students. These pranks were celebrated in the narrative, but one spark too close to a face could have permanently scarred a child. Mischief was never entirely harmless in a world where every object carried magical potential. The Triwizard Tournament also left behind victims we rarely consider. The enchanted maze in the third task was filled with spells designed to incapacitate or disorient. Cedric Diggory survived only because of skill and luck, but what about the other champions? Fleur Delacour was attacked by a blast-ended Scroot and incapacitated, lying helpless until rescued. These were officially sanctioned events where student injury was expected. The normalization of danger in wizarding culture suggests that the community accepted casualties as part of everyday life. For every Cedric who was mourned, how many others were merely written off as unfortunate accidents? The books are filled with humor and light-hearted depictions of magical mistakes, but if we step back, the darkness is unavoidable. Every dropped cauldron in potions class risked burns. Every backfired hex risked permanent scarring. Even Hermione, one of the most talented students, once ended up with a face full of teeth after a hex from Draco Malfoy in the Goblet of Fire. She required Madame Pomfrey's intervention to reverse the damage. Without a skilled healer nearby, even a schoolyard hex could disfigure for life. Such moments reveal how precarious safety truly was, even in the heart of the world's most prestigious school of magic. Ultimately, the hidden victims of magic form a shadow narrative behind Harry Potter's grand battles. They are the unnamed students carried to the hospital wing, the muggles who woke up with holes in their memories, the passers-by singed by stray curses, and the witches and wizards scarred by experiments gone wrong. They remind us that the power of magic was never neat or controlled, but wild and unpredictable. Every victory against Voldemort was built upon a world where countless smaller tragedies unfolded daily, invisible but no less real. Number 25. Silence of the Prophecies Hall. In the heart of the Department of Mysteries, beyond endless dark corridors, lies the Hall of Prophecies, a place described in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix as a high-ceilinged room, lit by the blue glow of thousands of glass spheres. Each glowing orb contains a fragment of fate, an echo of words spoken by a seer. Harry's shock upon discovering rows upon rows of these spheres reflects the hidden truth. The wizarding world is not only governed by laws, magic, and politics, but also by an invisible system that attempts to catalogue destiny itself. The sheer scale of this collection raises questions more troubling than the prophecy it hides. Who places the spheres there, and by what authority are these utterances of seers preserved? Trelawney's accidental prophecy about Harry and Voldemort stands as one of the few we directly witness. She utters it in Prisoner of Azkaban during an exam, when her voice changes and she declares, "The Dark Lord will rise again with his servant's aid, greater and more terrible than ever before. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches." This episode shows that true prophecies burst forth unpredictably, seizing the seer without warning. Trelawney herself admits she does not remember these moments. If she has no recollection of the words, then she could not have delivered the glass sphere herself. That means someone else must be responsible for the capture and recording of such visions. The Hall of Prophecies hints at an unseen surveillance system in the wizarding world. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of orbs line its shelves. One must ask, does the Ministry employ specialized wizards whose sole task is to monitor every seer alive, listening for the sudden change in voice, the telltale trance that signals a true prophecy? If so, this creates a chilling image of magical society, one where the freedom of visionaries is subtly stripped away, their rare glimpses of the future immediately harvested and stored. The Ministry would, in effect, be curating destiny itself, collecting and categorizing fragments of time before they unfold. Consider the gravity of such knowledge. If the Ministry possesses countless prophecies, some detailing wars, deaths, or revolutions, then the question becomes not how they are stored, but why they are ignored. The First Wizarding War could not have erupted without omens. The return of Voldemort was clearly foretold long before his rise, yet the Ministry appeared shocked and unprepared. Cornelius Fudge dismissed Harry's claims in Order of the Phoenix, insisting, "He's not back, he can't be back, it's lies, all of it." But if within their own walls sat shelves of prophecies, glowing and whispering with warnings, then Fudge's denial was not just ignorance, it was deliberate blindness. The handling of the prophecy about Harry himself demonstrates this paradox. When Dumbledore explains to Harry what Trelawney had foretold, he reveals that it was not the prophecy itself that mattered, but Voldemort's decision to act on it. Dumbledore says, "It was the cause of your scar, Harry, the reason you bear it, because Voldemort made you what you are." The Ministry, however, had long kept the prophecy locked away, guarded but not acted upon. Why guard what you do not use, unless of course they do use them, choosing carefully which destinies to acknowledge and which to bury in silence? This silence is what we might call the silence of the portals, Every orb represents a door into the future, but these doors remain locked, their voices muted until someone retrieves them. The unspeakables, those enigmatic figures who work in the Department of Mysteries, seem to have the role of custodians. They neither explain nor interfere. Their loyalty is to knowledge itself, not to the people who might be saved by that knowledge. It is unspeakables, perhaps, who transcribe the trance words of seers into the crystal spheres, sealing them away from the wider wizarding world. In this way, fate is preserved, but never shared. Let us return to Trelawney. She makes two known prophecies of great weight in the series, both recorded and both true. The first concerns Voldemort and Harry, the second predicts the return of the Dark Lord's servant. If both of these were preserved in orbs in the hall, then someone was present at the moment of utterance, or a charm was triggered to capture them. Imagine the implications. Every time a seer anywhere in the world makes a true prophecy, a magical mechanism records it instantly. The seer herself may never know, but somewhere in the ministry a shelf gains another orb. A system so precise suggests intent. Prophecies do not simply drift into spheres, they are pulled, captured, bound. That means the ministry is actively watching,